So hello and welcome back after our late lunch. So I'm delighted to welcome Kish Hirani here and Luke Hebblethwaite, is that correct?
It's close enough.
Close enough, thank you.
It's Hebblethwaite, but yeah.
Great,
We'll take it.
with a B.
Yeah.
Luke is going to be asking Kish some questions, and Kish will introduce himself and what he does. I'm sure that's the question Luke was going to ask him anyway.
It's almost number one.
Number one question. So, yeah, okay, ready to go.
So welcome to this talk, which is apparently titled Technology Quo Vadis. Does any of you know what that means? Anyone Googled it? I didn't know either. I Googled it.
It's Latin.
Yes, it is Latin, isn't it? And it means where are we going? So where are we going with tech?
Exactly.
And so to answer that question, we have the very insightful and somewhat legendary Kish Hirani, who has a quite prolific career in the games industry so far. Before we get into Kish, just a little bit about myself. So I'm Luke Hebblethwaite. I work at Ukie, the trade body for games that's obviously running this event that you obviously know all about. And my job is kind of the research and data side of things, so looking at the economics of the industry, but I also run our mixed reality network, which is all the Ukie members that are working in the VR, AR, mixed reality space, of which Kish is a very key member. So Kish, let's find out a bit about you. So do you want to tell me about how you really got into the industry?
Right.
What brings you here?
Stop it. Let me tell you what I do now, maybe.
Okay,
And I'll
yeah.
tell you how I get in the industry. And
absolutely.
then if that's not the way you want it, then we'll change it.
Absolutely.
Right. So Kish Hirani, I'm currently the CTO of a company called Terra Vitua. It's a new startup. We're doing VR. We're going to do companion app with AR. We're going to do blockchains because we're doing ICO, and the ICO is active right now. And what have I missed? And there's going to be some AI thrown into that. So I'm hoping that's all the tick boxes of the hot topics in technology right now.
So you're doing a startup that involves VR, AR, blockchain, cryptocurrencies, social aspects, and AI.
There you go.
So that's simple, right?
Just tick all the boxes
Yeah.
of what's the buzzword.
So
and
as you would
hope for
imagine,
the
an
best.
excellent person to be talking about various
Right.
bits
So
of technology.
that's what I'm doing right now. Going to your question of
Yeah.
how. As well, let me just mention this, but we're not going to focus on this, but I'm also the chair of BAME in Games, which is Black, Asian, Ethnic Minority in video games industry. It's just a voluntary position I have, just advocating diversity in video games. I'm also on the board of as Women in Games, quite privileged to be invited and trusted to be on a board which is meant to be Women in Games. So yeah, that's a thing I do as a spare, and let's everybody settle in and I'll continue.
So just while we're waiting, maybe it's worth just having a bit of a show of hands to learn a bit about what you guys are doing, so that we can steer our questions a bit more accordingly. Which kind are you working? Hands up if you're working sort of the engineering, programming side of things. Yeah, a couple of that. If you're more the games design kind of area. Any artists around? A couple of that, and then the business people. Yeah, you've got a few. Okay, so it's quite a mixed crowd.
Good.
You've got to wear all of your many hats for this one.
Right. So start with, I started in the video games industry 22 years ago. Started off as a programmer. My first degree was mathematics and computer sciences, and then decided to do masters because 22 years ago already everybody was doing computer sciences, and I needed to stand out to get a job. So then did a master's in computer sciences at Edinburgh University, and then straight away joined video games industry from that. My first job was in Scotland, and I'll talk a bit more later on if anybody wants to know on how to get in the games industry, and I think it's exactly the same as it was 23 years ago, as in it's not easy, but once you're in, then it's a lot easier to move around. So do ask me that question if you are interested to know that. But thereafter, pretty much somehow ended up getting into jobs which ended up managing really smart technical people, which I was at one place, and then you lose all that smartness, and then you just sort of end up getting roles like technical directors or the CTOs and the likes, where you take credit for all the technology which all the smart guys are doing. So that's where I ended up being a CTO right now. But in between that, so a lot of companies I work with, THQ, Acclaims, sort of hands-on managing amazing, talented individuals, and then at a certain point, so that was my first 10 years, I decided to move on to platform holders. So I went to Microsoft first, so I was a tech evangelist for them, working as a contractor remotely, reporting into Seattle. And then this role came up at Sony as head of developer services. So then 8 years stretch, I was head of developer services at Sony, based in London, handling anything technical you can think of as far as developer focused in the historic PAL region, which it is a very, very strange region where you can just say it's minus the American continents and Japan, everything else came under my team. But then having said that, there's not a lot of development in Africa and there's not that great development in Asia in terms of video games consoles. So effectively was handling all of Europe and Australia. And then Australia decided that's a different story as well. Where a lot of the video games development trickled down, so it was Europe.
Yeah.
So, and then I went self-employed. I was made redundant at Sony, and that's another thing if anybody wants to know. Although I'm hoping I'm going to be very positive and it's exciting, and I want all of you to be. In fact, both of us want all of us to join in the video games industry. But it is an industry where you get a lot of redundancies and you need to shift jobs, etc. But if you want to go a bit more negative on reality of video games industry, I'll jump onto that right now. But anyway, so I went self-employed, did a lot of consultancy, a lot of tech consultancy, a lot of giving back to the industry, and then here I am.
Yeah.
Now as a CTO of Terra Vitua. We launched 3 weeks ago. So that's exactly, yeah. So I sort of started in November with Terra Vitua, and effectively as a tech consultant. Then it sort of they said, why didn't you join us, the CTO,
Right.
and what does that involve? And he was like, exactly what you're doing right now, except you have a CTO title. So that's where we go.
Okay. And so why don't you tell us a little bit more about the Terra Virtual platform?
Right, okay. So Terra Vitua itself is it's VR only virtual platform. It's a metaverse, so you will exist in a VR. And the key sort of point right now, which is this uniqueness as such, I would say, is all the content will be free. So we're going to have a subscription-based model. So you pay a subscription and then you can play everything in VR for free. Now, when I say sort of unique in that sense, it's I mean, there are lots of VR content out there, which I hope you agree, but it's not selling as fast or getting adoption as fast. And there are multiple factors, and could be the devices are sort of.
Yeah, we can come on to that.
We can come out later. And so we just came up with that, why don't we give all the content, and this is existing VR titles, into a universe. You jump in and you've already got your VR visor on, and then you can do whatever else you want to do in a metaverse, talk to your friends, etc. But as well as part of the subscription, there are games which are already playing, so why don't you just jump in and continue playing those games, but don't pay for them, but it's part of your subscription.
So the idea being something, you know, akin to like a shopping mall that you walk around, and rather than going to shops, you just sort of seamlessly transition into whatever game it is you're playing. You don't have to then, you know, take your headset off, load up the game, put your headset back on, and all that. Because that's kind of breaking up the feel.
It is, but I wouldn't sort of go down to, because every game until VR doesn't take up that much processing power, you will need to load your game.
Yeah.
So that's unfortunately is a reality.
Right.
But then how do you keep people occupied as well while that's happening as well? That's something which it's going to be part of the universe.
And so you've got quite a lot of experience in VR generally. I mean, so from what I understand, quite a lot of your work at Sony was based on the sort of the early days of PSVR.
So yeah, at Sony, I'd probably say maybe month 3 of R&D of what was codenamed Project Morpheus. I would say 6 years ago, 7 years ago, so, and we were involved with that. So I'm not making this up, but internally the R&D within VR happened a lot earlier than Oculus and everything else got announced. And if you want to ask if did Sony just copy Oculus and everything else, no. Any credible company right now, be it Apple, be it Google, all the names you can think of, if they have the bandwidth, are doing R&D in every single topic you can think of right now. What happens is, if they see the market is right, they literally just then throw in lots of resources or so. There's a small team, and that's exactly what happened with Project Morpheus, which is based where we are right now. That a small team was working on R&D, and what I sort of saw, and we within Sony saw as well, and I said I won't take the credit for that, but within Sony, what they saw when the Oculus was announced is it's only focusing on VR as a visual sort of a device, which to be honest, if anybody wants to know or wants me to elaborate how VR works, it's very, very simple. In fact, I'm going to do that. It's just, as everybody put on a Google Cardboard. Yeah, that is literally VR, magnifying glass, and then you've got your visuals on there, which are just rendered in a way stereoscopically, and then most of why you're paying more for devices like Oculus and PlayStation VR or so is the sensors. So then it's mapping up what your movements are. So we can go a lot more technical into that, but that's basically how VR works. And what we saw was there's a lot more to VR than just the visuals. We looked at binaural audio, and when when Oculus was announced, they were not even focusing on that, the social aspect of VR, etc. So we just said we need to jump in at this time as well.
I think that for me, when PSVR was, when it was finally announced, I think it was immediately obvious, it was a much more sort of efficient consumer product. It was the way you put it on was so much more ergonomic and so much more sort of refined than the others, which you essentially velcroed to your head at that point. And I think also in terms of when the first round of the content that came out with the PSVR, they'd really thought about the differences in the kind of ways you would interact with the various games. So, using the screen as a second, the TV as a second screen, all that kind of stuff, where you've got that game that when someone's like a big sort of monster and everyone else is little figures that are fighting against them, and so it's a kind of competitive play. I think that it was clear that Sony had obviously been working on it for quite some time and had some sort of solid design thinking, both in terms of the product, but also in terms of how you then implement and use it.
So the early VR at Sony, I thought that was so cool because it was through move controllers in exactly what you've just described. It was a bicycle helmet type of thing, and we put I think there was 2 move controls on the side and one at the top to go to the sensors. So that's how it starts. But that's the beauty of Sony and other companies like Apple, etc. A lot of engineers and technical people who've got these amazing ideas, they're bringing into a nice form factor, and that's the beauty of companies like this they can come up with, and credit to a lot of guys within other Sony divisions, etc., who came up with that sort of form factor, which made it a lot easier.
And so what you're saying is, Apple are going to have a VR headset sat on a shelf, or several different versions of headsets sat on a shelf ready to go if they then decide now the time to enter. They're all sort of working behind the scenes and all this kind of stuff constantly.
Exactly. I'm pretty sure at Apple the Newton team didn't just disappear, or iPad didn't just come about. That team evolved, and I think I've worked in R&D division, so that's literally how things work. There'll be a lot of small core teams just working on exciting stuff, and then just put a lot of smart people and make it into a product.
Yeah, sure. And I guess to picking up on what you said earlier, VR hasn't necessarily had that massive or big bang moment that I think, when sort of the first Oculuses and Vive and so on were released a few years ago now, people were expecting it to be in sort of everyone's home and everyone's hands, by now. And we're talking about, hundreds of millions of games sold and all that kind of thing. But the market's been quite a bit slower. So why do you think that is?
I think it's because probably a lot of technology is being taken for granted. I don't think the first Newton, for example, Apple Newton. But sorry, I might sound old, but does everybody know what Apple Newton was?
I don't know what it is.
So you didn't know that? No. So it was the very first iPad. The origins of iPad. Somebody else would probably know. Do you know what year was it? When did they release it?
Long time ago.
80s, wasn't it? Yeah. So it's not. Yeah. But
well, hopefully we're a little further on than the
exactly. But that technology didn't take off. Same with Google Glass. So I think VR is the same. That I think it was slightly oversold. Oversold in the sense of I think nobody did that because there's nobody controlling how the messaging will be. There's several credible companies out there. So personally, as a technology, I think if you compare it to other stuff, at the pace it's moving, it is growing, it's evolving, and it's evolving its audience as well in terms of acceptance. To me, there are a number of sort of things, maybe just on top of my head, I'll probably say form factor needs to change. I always give this example, but what I would probably see would be a killer form factor would be something like an Oakley glass, the skiing glass, that would be more acceptable. I think
something that's much more easy just to take
exactly.
off.
I think glasses itself, that's going to take a while before it reaches into that smaller factors, etc. And a lot of that, it's more to do with when you put a lot of processing power, etc. I was talking to a couple of guys during lunchtime or so, but it's to put a contact lens inside your eye and then hope that works as a VR device or AR device or so. The biggest issues are not miniaturizing on that. It's more the processing power, the battery which you'll require to run. Where would you put that battery, and how is it going to beam that power into that device? But even more than that, it's anything which is computationally intensive creates heat. Your cell phones as well create. Use the word cell phone. Your mobile phones. Mobile phones create heat, etc. So having intense processing
Not sure
going
I want
on.
my phone when it gets hot in my eye.
In your
It's
eye,
not really
exactly.
the place-
So
not really the place for it.
Exactly. So, but we'll get there at some point. So although when you hear about patents and all these sort of exciting things to come, so some of these exciting things to come will make it more mass market. Back to your question of why is we are not getting there, but I don't think some of these things are probably sooner than later.
Yeah, I think there's an element of it as well. You know, looking at it from sort of an analyst point of view. You know, in the early days, it's a lot of businesses trying to get funding for, you know, they're building Oculus, you know, they're building the Vive, whatever those are, you know, the devices are. But they're trying to drive, you know, they're trying to sell to investors and saying, you know, we're trying to get this thing, it's going to be massive. Look how many people play Call of Duty, they could all be using our device. And that's a great thing to say if you want people to give you loads of money. And so it kind of works for that. But then I guess, you know, the reality of VR is not necessarily that, you know, things like Call of Duty don't necessarily work in VR right now. They're too fluid. We haven't worked out that sort of design language in the games, and I guess that's something, you know, a lot of people here will be thinking about in their sort of games that they're building. But
So killer apps is probably a good
that is probably that is
what is the
almost
VR,
like
VR
seeing
killer
my
apps?
questions. So yeah, I mean, so let's talk about killer apps. I mean,
I don't, unless somebody else, please put up your hand if they have played a VR killer app. I don't think we have one yet. But I'll take this as a positive. That means there's great opportunity for all of you and all of us, because we haven't found that killer app yet or what works. What VR needs is I'm going to ask you.
What do you call a killer app?
Killer app is one must-have. Let's take out on mobile phone, although this might sound horrible now, but Candy Crush probably I would say is the killer app for mobile phones.
it's just that thing that really
drives that, yeah.
It's
So
that thing
it's
that's that must-have element.
Recall is pretty good.
Oh,
Yeah,
exactly.
it is.
Absolutely. So and again, those are there's some amazing, fantastic VR games, but it should be one of those where you can tell the mass market, not just hardcore gamers, that you must have this and try this, and it's going to be fun. And they put on the visor on and just like, I don't want to let go of this, and I'm going to, as soon as I finish playing this, I'm going to jump back again.
It's it's Mario Odyssey and Zelda that bring the Switch through. It's that kind of.
Absolutely. And so it's a mass market, I'd probably say, not just your core gamers. That would be the killer app.
Yeah, and I think so. One of the things about VR headsets, I mean, there's quite a variety, I guess, in terms of there's the higher end devices which come at a premium price. I mean, PSVR has recently come down to I think $299 in the UK, so it's £100 less than it used to be, which is quite a reduction in the time it's been out. But you're looking at some of the other, the other devices. They're very expensive still. The Vive 1.5 has come out, and that's got an enormous price tag. It's got slightly better tech and all that, but we're still talking about very premium products. That you need a high-end PC to run. But then I guess there's the mobile side of things. So you talk about Google Cardboard, which is really right down the other end.
Yeah.
Then we have the sort of middle ground with the Daydream and that kind of stuff. And so, what do you think? Where do you think this will head? Do you think we'll see more? We'll see sort of harmonisation across those things, or do you think we'll see it sort of separate out into the mobile world, very separate from that of the high-end stuff? And do you think the mobile is more for sort of augmented rather than virtual reality?
So let me go on the price point first.
Okay.
And, I think, again, the audience evolves. If I told you 10 years ago, 15 years ago for sure, but you'll be upgrading your phone every year and paying $500, most of you, if you've got an iPhone X, $1,000 or something every year, you would not believe me that that would ever be a reality. But we are now doing that. I mean, every single person here is probably upgrading their mobile phone at least every 1.5 years or so. There's subscription models, with your tariff providers or so, but you've actually grown an audience and made them believe that this is the must-have and this is the way of life. It's same as you have to pay your bills to get electricity, and suddenly, like 15 years ago, nobody would thought a mobile phone would be essential. But that's sort of the point where it reaches. So I think the pricing for VR, etc., as long as you have a must-have, you need this. Most of you, I won't have any spoilers, but if you've seen Ready Player One, I don't think we'll exist in that sort of world. But if it comes that sort of thing where everybody needs a VR device to get into this world, because otherwise the reality is just so sad and terrible. Let's hope that never happens. Make sure that never happens.
I don't know, I mean, it's not going great, is it? I mean, all things considered.
There you go, so that we can live in VR. That help Terra Vitua, absolutely.
Yeah, okay,
Come and live in Terra Vitua. So I think, so pricing wise, I think they're all priced quite right. There's a market for that. For mass market, I think as soon as you get enough killer apps, again, sorry, using that word, and I think we've almost confused people by using that word, but because I can't give you an example of what is everybody needs to have that on VR. But once we get there, I think pricing shouldn't matter at all, and there should be a room for everybody, sort of the people who just want to try out VR. That's same as if you take your phone. I just want to make a phone call down to your top end, where I want to make a phone call, I want to play video games, but not just that. I want my phone to look at me and then it opens up. So you pay a price.
And gives Facebook all of your data for you and all that.
Luke doesn't have a Facebook account.
I don't actually.
And I have a Twitter account, but I don't tweet. So.
Yeah, so we never talk to each other.
Yeah.
That's what it's good, isn't it?
Right. Yes.
Just shouting into the void. Okay, yeah, so I guess, looking at mobiles then, and sort of augmented reality really seems to be much more the tech for mobile, really, I guess. And so, I mean, I was at this thing, I was at GDC a couple of weeks ago, and we were running the UK stand, and just opposite was Google's stand. And they had this sort of show reel of augmented reality games. And there's a Walking Dead game, there's a Jurassic Park game, there's a Ghostbusters game, all essentially Pokemon Go with a new skin on, right? And I guess, like, is that really what we can expect from augmented reality, or do you think we...
Personally, and this is my personal opinion, and it's probably not a great thing to say, especially if we are trying to sell video games industry and attracting people coming into video games. Again, going to be honest, as I said, as far as I said, with VR, we'll find some amazing video game which will be a killer app for VR. With AR, I don't think video games will be the killer app. It'll be more exciting stuff like me looking at you with my, if contact lens ever exists, or just a phone or something, and I just know everything about you. But probably Luke is not a good example because he's not on Facebook, so I've probably heard very little data about him. But yeah, just having that augmented in the world, which gives you, it's your Google, but just rather than having to type and search things, you'll actually be just walking around with just some crazy amount of augmented information around you. Yes. So, and to me, that I think that'll be more the killer apps or so, rather than video games.
If you want to see what that future looks like, there's a really good video called Hyper Reality.
I've seen that.
It's on YouTube. It's definitely worth a watch, and a slightly terrifying view of what it
so
could
I
be.
actually did. I think you've read it, but I did an interview with Porsche on launch of their new Panamera E hybrid. And I was talking about VR and AR, and with AR, just saying your windscreen itself is a VR device, and what it will be, rather than just having information blasted over you, because that'll be distracting while you're driving, but it'll just enhance your driving. So if there are objects like a deer or road signs, etc., in front of you, so you'll actually be able to just see it in augmented view, and I think that's the reality where
so it's much more practical application, the kind of stuff that's really going to be the sales driver for that. I'm sure, I think we will see some interesting games come out of it. I kind of agree with you.
Yeah, I guess some of the examples I've seen, like the Minecrafts, and I think you'll play those, yes, but I don't think that's something which will sell AR.
Yeah.
It's far more exciting. And Pokemon Go, and hopefully everybody being academic, has done the most amazing thing in terms of the investors, etc., to understand what AR is. But any academic person you'll ask, they'll say that's not AR whatsoever, which is sort of true. And I think, Anthony, if you're moving on from AR to MR,
we can do. We've got a few minutes. We've not got too much longer left.
So we haven't. So when we do,
what I might do before we open up and ask for some questions is that I thought, we've spoken a little bit about Terra Vitua, and the sort of the part of it we haven't really covered is the blockchain and crypto aspect of it. So you're doing an ICO, which is an initial coin offering. So from my understanding, that is basically you sell tokens over a crypto currency network that works through the Ethereum chain. And you're basically asking investors to buy into your currency before it's released in order to then fund the platform, use that initial funding to then fund the building of the platform.
Yeah. So, and I'll take it as my CTO role.
Yeah.
I've actually got very little involvement in that part of things, and it's how it should be. So blockchain is a very sort of loosely used term, and if you're ever going for an interview and if you've done blockchain or read up about blockchain and you want to throw that in, please promise me don't use the word Bitcoin in that same sentence, because then you've lost all credibility. And I'm going to give Will Freeman, the credible journalist, the credit for this, but he says talking about Bitcoin on any topic related to blockchain is same as talking about email as the internet 20 years ago. And yes, people would have understood that you understand what internet is going to be all about, just because email is a killer app on it.
So what's the fundamental difference then?
So blockchain, actually, let me just, I'm going to ask the audience, so sorry, I'm taking over you.
That's fine. You can interview yourself. It's all right.
Can you do that? They can interview.
I'm
me
redundant
well.
now.
You could have an AI interviewer,
Anyway.
which is the future, possibly. How many of you have heard of blockchain? How many have heard, okay, let's do it the other way. How many have not heard of the word blockchain? Not heard, great. And how many have heard of Bitcoin? Or how many have not heard of Bitcoin? Okay, great. Yeah. So this is where so everybody's heard about the Bitcoin. It's a shame because that's then the example you have to use. Okay, blockchain. What's the easiest? Let me. It's nothing new whatsoever. It's exactly how. Let me give you a very simple example of what a blockchain is. Every time you. I'll simplify this so that it's not only for programmers. Right. Every time you put input or any script into the computer and ask it to put an output, it'll put out a string. So let's say computer type hello world, and then it'll reply back hello world. Now internally that's all binary, but a layer in between or so would be a sort of unique digital signature of what it just put out. Now Luke can then go and change my code and type in computer say hello again or where else or so, and that will have a completely different signature. And so blockchains are where the difference is between what he has typed and I have typed, although I've probably lost all of you already. I'm trying to simplify it as much as possible.
So it's kind of that kind of permanent record
exactly.
of transactions that have happened within a system, right?
It's not even a transaction, it's just any event which is taking place in a computer.
But
so what blockchain works exactly is put a ledger of all the events taking place at any given time, and as you said, transaction is the easiest one.
Yeah.
And so let me, nobody here studying accountancy or that sort of field is there. I mean, you're all creative fields or so. So accountancy is a very easy example to give when you take, especially with currency. So the word account came about to be, and the profession accountancy came about to be, because we have got a flow in a system where money exists in multiple different locations and instances. So if I pay you by PayPal, it goes out of my account and appears in your account, but at that instant, that bank has got that same money as well. Yeah. So to correct that flow of the system, you account for it at the end of the month. So you balance your book, you do your bookkeeping. So what you're doing effectively, you've got a flow in the system where money can exist in multiple places, and then you, at the end of the month, at the end of your tax year, or whatever periods they are, you correct that. with blockchain, everything can only exist in one instant.
Right.
So as soon as I've got this money and recorded as blockchain, as soon as it's passed on to you, that doesn't exist with me whatsoever. So something like a profession, why we mentioned the word accountancy, make sure if you're doing a degree in accountancy, you're studying blockchains as well, because that's where the future of money is going into. Hopefully your job wouldn't be redundant, but it'll be called an accountant, but you wouldn't be accounting for anything because there wouldn't be any need to. So that more
and I think
explains
the thing as well with blockchains as well is that it doesn't have to be money that's moving around, it could be any object.
Absolutely.
And so one of the applications I think that is being talked about is this kind of permanent record of things that exist within games. You know, if you're in an MMO and I sell you my magic sword, that it would be a permanent record that it came from me and went to you, and that would be inherent within that object.
Absolutely. And also it's a collector. Sorry.
Well, I was just saying, and sort of you could embed that level of permanence and things existing in perpetuity within that game world through things like the blockchain to say this is always going to be there. So it doesn't matter who or what happens. This is fully recorded within the system.
And it adds value because then it becomes that sort of collectors that will just say, I've only got 10 of this ever. And then I can trust that that's all about it's ever going to be, so it becomes a more collective. So from video, actually, let's bring this back more into video games. And Terra Vitua, where I'm focusing on as a CTO, is that sort of APIs we're going to be creating where video games developers will be able to add, and not just video games developer, including users as well. So a lot of user-generated content. So let me give you a bit I don't think it's a far-fetched example, but I'll probably give you because I would love to have this, where you as a video game developer, you don't have time to create every single object in your game. So you can put out a tender of just saying, my players create objects for me, and they'll have a unique signature of an object they've created for you, and they'll go into the game, and as your game is played or so, you are somehow indirectly, because it's got a unique signature, and if it's just put some value into it, so that person then won't give you any cash, but eventually will earn just because your game is successful.
I think we're starting to see examples of that. So I think Worlds Adrift by Bossa Studios is a good example there. They're using technology provided by Improbable. But that also does a similar kind of task, and they have a whole user-generated content in terms of the different islands that exist within the world, and each one is designed by a player, effectively, who's then submitted it, and this idea of these objects that are being permanently recorded using the improbable technique rather than the blockchain, but it would be a sort of shift out either one of those technologies for the other in order to do that job.
And I think that's where it gets exciting, especially for even you guys or so, the creative guys come up with designs where I think you guys have the liberty of thinking something completely radically different, whereas in people who are working in a game development studio existing, they have to support the current models of things rather than coming up with something completely fresh. So effectively, I think it's a great opportunity for anybody who wants to make their next Minecraft, where you're literally not playing a game, you're just creating stuff, and if somebody tries to sell you that, even 5 years ago, so you probably wouldn't have believed, but then Minecraft's been, 12 years, 15 years running, and people, the gameplay there is just you create stuff and just run around and...
Well, I think we've done a good job there, a whistle-stop tour of various technologies, so it's either enlightened you somewhat or made you even more confused, hopefully. I think a bit of both.
And we didn't cover AI as well.
Well, yeah, we haven't really covered that, but I guess...
Fine.
Well,
let's give some questions.
Yeah, I think if anyone's got any questions, I'd like to fire out. Yeah, sure.
So I'd like to understand a bit what's different from the app you're creating, I mean the service, servicing compared to the Steam room for VR or the Oculus room as well, the Oculus Home.
Yep. So the blockchain is where we're providing that unique sort of element. So you will, Terra Vitua, so I don't want to focus too much on selling Terra Vitua itself, because that's not the purpose here. But unfortunately that question lands so well to sell it.
What a shame.
But what's unique in terms of Terra Vitua is we've first of all, it's built on blockchain. That's one investment part where it fits in. But every API, so we're going to build it in Unreal. So the Unreal Engine is effectively the building blocks of Terra Vitua itself. We are going to build worlds in that. But it means all the tools, and we've got Terraformer, which will be our tool chain, which we'll provide to developers. To your question, if you've got a title already existing on Oculus or Steam, you can bring it into Terra Vitua as well as an added revenue, and so we are not making anybody remove their titles from those platforms. But if you then want to go further and adopt blockchains, we'll provide APIs where you can then monetize in a very, very different way. And I'll probably say, when I say very, very different way, a lot of this is very similar to what you're doing. It's the same as you running. So, strange example, but imagine running around as Mario collecting coins and as a 10-year-old, but there's nothing you can do about that because all you're doing is just getting these coins, and at the end of the day you get bonus. But what if when you turn 18 those coins are valued at something, because it was a virtual currency you are collecting all your life in that, all your young life as such. So when you're old enough where you can actually change that into real currency, they call them fiat currency. That's just one example. So the possibilities, I think, are going to be amazing, and I'm hoping a lot of developers and guys like you will come into Terra Vitua and come up with some innovative way of actually monetizing your game, and not just monetizing for yourself, but for your players, your gamers. So the time they're putting onto your game, they're actually earning something. The last thing also, and we're going to stop this again, Terra Vitua will make sure, is you don't bring a sort of generation of binge players who just playing video games just because you can earn a lot of money in there. So that's, again, ethically you have to make sure you provide tools and so where it doesn't go in that direction either.
So, yeah.
It's interesting that you've talked about VR and the R&D departments that big companies have, and the question is, do you have an R&D department or a QA department that's specifically looking at the problems inherent to VR headsets, things like motion sickness and things like the fact that it becomes uncomfortable to play for longer periods of time? So are you looking at that and trying to take that into account for the products that you design?
So we wouldn't design the products, but we will absolutely make sure there is some sort of, because you don't want bad VR experiences, and again, it's down to most of the technologies right now. In fact, our phones are all credible VR headsets right now. If you design a game which ticks all the right boxes, and there's so many design docs available now, you can make a very, very decent, compelling experience without making anybody ill. And you can do exactly the opposite and design games which would make somebody ill as soon as they put the headset on as well.
The aspect of game design, I think we've started to understand that what works, what doesn't work. But I think in terms of things like motion sickness, I think that was a lot to do with frame rates. It was a lot to do with how those games are set up. But if you design a game that is literally spinning the user around as fast as they can go, they're not going to feel great about that. So I think, I think for the most part, all serious games that are being made now sort of cross those initial barriers. But certainly in terms of things like length of playtime, because you're wearing a headset, you can only wear that for a certain amount of time. A lot of design thinking is into chunking up the game into sort of bite-sized bits of content that you can go through. And I think that's one of the, when you have something like Fallout that came out in VR, which is a 200-odd hour game. I certainly spent that playing it, not in VR, and the prospect of 200 hours in a headset seems somewhat intimidating. So I think that most designers now are working out, as the technology develops, but very much using those sort of aspects of the limitations that in the technology at the moment in the game design itself.
And you can actually make somebody really ill in a 2D game as well. The programmers would probably sort of understand in terms of your view frustums or so. When you're setting up those matrix in a 3D game, you can actually make somebody really ill. And there was a sort of, again, sorry, showing my age, I think it was in the 90s or so, where some people just got really ill playing Quake, and what was the other popular game at that? Was it Call of Duty? And it was just one of those things where you're perfectly fine a sudden first-person shooter, and then you aren't fine with the other. Again, your field of view, etc. So you can actually, luckily, we moved well away from that, where most people are not writing their engines from scratch, etc. I think DirectX did that amazing. Those who are programmers here will understand exactly what I'm talking about, which means you're not getting games, and we've reached a point where we don't even talk about do video games on 2D screens make you ill, and we will reach, and we sort of have, I think, and that's how any consumer product's made. If you stop buying games which are just horrible and the word of mouth spreads very, very fast as such, then those games will just not be made. But an interesting thing, and again, what I want to do and I don't talk about Terra Vitua, but I'm going to mention
You're the one talking about it.
It's a virtual world, so exactly. You can stop me, by the way, you're the moderator.
Oh, well, we can have there's another question. We've only got a few minutes. So we can take another
so
question.
Terra Vitua, I'm going to and we take one more question. We'll have an area where you will have experimental gaming. Obviously, we have to curate that because you don't want people falling ill. But that's the beauty of a virtual world where there is an area you can just go in just because you know you can. And be brave and
you're going to have a little sign up saying you have to be this crazy to get on this ride.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's a question at the back, I think. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. You know, like when it comes to Matrix, right? And they had the headset, and it sort of like beams you into like a virtual reality, but you're not. It's sort of like a dream.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you? How far do you think they're away from that?
To make you dream. Actually, so. This is reality. So at Sony, I went to Israel, and there's this R&D team who are. I'll give you the intro they gave. By the way, the world is becoming more peaceful, so our technology is not required by the Israeli army. So we're trying to sell it to video games instead, and that's how they did the intro. And what they had was induce sleep patterns in your brain by having this device. Which means, so to learn a helicopter apparently takes close to 7 years or something before you can become a helicopter. It's very, very difficult to be able to learn how to fly a helicopter.
Yeah, sure.
So they're selling to the army was to make you learn something, put you in sleep for 15. So by the way, if you don't sleep, this will make you sleep now, or you should sleep. That's when your brain rewires and you learn a lot of things. So if you are just staying awake to just cram something or so, that's probably great for cramming. But in order for your brain to learn certain things or so, you need to have a break, go and have a sleep, and then come back to the same problem and start solving. And that's just how you rewire things.
No, that's one of the reason why, you know, when people say sleep on it, it's because in the time your brain's
So
doing
what they had was just put you into sleep for 5 minutes, which would be equivalent to you rewiring your entire brain and learning, and then you put you back into a helicopter and learn. And I said, but how about we could do that in video games? We could have amazing, crazy video games. So there are technologies out there, but I wouldn't want
There's
to
an
be
ethical concern now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just going out there.
Actually, there's a number of 10 years ago, so with
I think the Daily Mail might have
people
something
that
to
put
say
devices on your head and make you control a game as a controller. So.
No, I think, you know, that kind of virtual world stuff. You know, we're not necessarily putting a big spike in the back of your head like in the Matrix. But that kind of virtual world stuff is starting to come through a lot more. There's, you know, as well as Terra Vitua, there's a few other platforms that are coming out, which is that, I suppose, you know, things like VR chat, which are sort of simplistic versions of it. But that kind of idea of a place where you can go and hang out in that sort of Second Life kind of environment, but in VR, that are of high enough quality in terms of the visual fidelity and the experiences that you can have within there. They're quite social, so the idea of, you know, you can go and sort of physically meet your friends but in a virtual space. Those things are very much happening at the moment, and I think that, you know, the current round of hardware that we have has its limitations, but that will, you know, there'll be another Oculus out at some point, there'll be another HTC, the Apple will get on the market, so we'll see new iterations of this hardware which will again enable us to do more detailed, you know, graphics and so forth. So I think it's a slow process at the moment, but it's definitely getting there over the next few years.
Can I summarize that as technology with anything is just because you can doesn't mean you should.
A good point to end on.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, but yes, we are out of time now.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.